Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining me from. I am so very thankful to be here with you today and thankful that you chose to join me here today. I'm so sorry that I missed you last week and I apologize for that, and I appreciate your patience with me on that, but I just wasn't feeling up to it. And well, I also didn't really have a voice, so it would have been like, interpretive dancing, root vegetables, which no one wants to see ever, anywhere. Anyway, hey, welcome to this Ruby live event. My name is Barton Seaver. I'm a chef, author, husband, father. I live on the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine, where I'm joining you from today here in my home kitchen. And wow, well, it is a beautiful day. Any of you who have joined me here before know that I like to start off with a little moment of gratitude because, well, cooking is an act of love. It is an act of kindness. It is something that we do for others because we love them. And so therefore, the very first and most important ingredient in any recipe is gratitude that we feel for others, for ourselves, for the ingredients that we serve. So I hope that you will take maybe a moment today at some point, maybe right now, or whenever you're preparing your next meal and before every meal, to just take a second to think about something that you're grateful for. Now, the thing that I am grateful for that I will share with you, two things. A, that I'm feeling better, because that's wonderful. And yeah, it's nice. It's nice to not feel bad. And the other is that I had a really great morning with my little 19-month-old Rosie boy this morning. He is such a gem and such a wonder and becomes so communicative. But really, is there anything cuter in the world than a baby with an idea? No. It is literally the cutest thing that could ever be. And Rosie's starting to get some real ideas. His brain is just expanding, and I just marvel to look at him and feed him and all sorts of things. Anyway, so that's that. We are talking about root vegetables today. It's a really fun topic. It's pretty relevant right now when, well, hey, in the middle of February, not much else is ripe anywhere. And so we're looking to those storage crops. But this is also really a category of vegetables that is around throughout the year and has some pretty surprising uses. And we'll talk about a few fun dishes today. We're going to talk about how to buy them. We're going to talk about how to store them. We're going to talk about a little bit of how to grow them, because I live here on a farm and I farm quite a bit of my own food. Let's see what else. We're going to talk about a whole lot of diversity of them, get into a couple of dishes. Yeah, and of course, take all of your questions. So any question that you have, put it on over there in the chat box right to the right-hand side, and I will try my best to get to all the questions today. If you see a question that is already over there that is particularly interesting to you, just click that little heart icon in the bottom right-hand corner of it to vote it up to the top to make sure that I will see it. And so with that, thanks again for joining us. Let's dive into root veg. I got a whole bunch of them in front of me today. So let's just talk about what a root vegetable is. Well, a root vegetable is, there's a couple of different families and categories of plants that fall into the non-biological culinary category of root vegetables. You've got rhizomes and tubers and bulbotubers, which is my new favorite word. I was doing a little bit of research before this today, and I found the word bulbotuber, which is just awkward and fun to say both at the same time. But root vegetables, what kind of distinguishes them, what kind of unifies them? Density, right? And they are meant as storage agents for carbohydrates of various sources for the plants. Things like potatoes are there not only to draw energy for the plant, but also to perenniate, I think was the biological term. Basically to bring an annual plant back next year. So in fact, it's sort of the seed that is planted in the ground. But there's lots of starch in these. There's lots of carbohydrates of various sources, sugars, lots of vitamins, minerals, nutrients. They're quite healthy for us. And you know what? They're also quite fun to cook with. Why? Well, because they offer us a range of flavors and textures, tastes, colors. And yeah, well, hey, isn't that fun? So root vegetables, what are we talking about? Celery root, turnips, beets. This is an egg. That's not a root vegetable. We're talking about sweet potatoes. What else do I got? I've got turmeric. I've got horseradish. I've got carrots, parsnips, radishes, onions, garlic, right? Parsley root, salsify. There's a whole huge range of them. And in this category are some of the most important food crops in the world, especially in the temperate bands, where The starchy root vegetables such as yucca, etc., cassava are really an important part of the diet. They are somewhat resistant to drought. They can be stored for long periods of time, and they provide a huge amount of nutrition. So root vegetables have an oversized role in a lot of cuisines around the world. And, well, hey, so let's dive into it. So we talked a little bit about what are root vegetables, some of the other ones that we associate with root vegetables, like squash is not a root vegetable, but in terms of its density, in terms of sort of its culinary qualities, we consider it as somewhat of a root vegetable and treat it as such. So let's talk about how to buy root vegetables, right? Okay, so I've got this celery root here, and this is a very, very big celery root, and I've cut off the other side of it because I've got a dish of it going back behind me here that I'll show you a little bit later, but celery root is one of my favorites. It's incredibly aromatic. But what you are looking for is a relatively clean outside skin or peel, whatever it is. You don't want a whole lot of dirt that's going to end up just in your refrigerator or on your cutting board, etc. A little bit is fine. You're going to find more of that at a farmer's market, of course. Great, go for it. It's fine. It's not an issue. Just make sure that if they are dirty, that you scrub them down a little bit. The other thing that you want to look for really with root veggies, because so many of them are harvested and then stored for long periods of time in cold storage, some of them can get a little rubbery, right? So you want something that's still quite firm to the touch. So given that I was going to do this very segment last week but didn't get to it, I have a whole bunch of root veg sitting in my fridge for quite some time. And, well, look what happens. So carrots that I bought as a prime example of what you should buy become rather flaccid, floppy carrots. Nobody wants flaccid carrot. No one. So there's that. So avoid these. Are they bad? No, not at all. They're totally fine. And of course you can use them. And of course they're going to be delicious. Are they going to last? Are they going to give you that crispness that you're looking for out of carrot? Are you going to get a good carrot stick out of this? No. No, you're not. So buy them. And what that means is that they were taken out of storage fresh. And the difference there is that a root veg, as I mentioned, was sort of a storage vessel for the plant itself. And so when the temperature changes for that storage vessel, that is the biological sign to start doing whatever it is that plant was going to do. Right? So it sort of wakes up the biology of the plant and begins to change its physiology. You're going to get different starch to sugar ratios, etc. So another thing about root veg is some of them come with tops on them, like some celery roots come with some very, very aromatic celery. Beet greens, of course. Again, I bought these last week. Forgive the beet greens. They're a little aged. Turnip greens, of course. Carrot tops. Now, this might just look like a fun, beautiful thing to have on there, right, which just sells the carrot, but really, these are quite useful in and of themselves. So if you can find root vegetables with the tops on them, by all means, go for it. Why? Because it's the same price and you get more food. And make a pesto out of carrot tops is absolutely delicious with a slightly spicy, somewhat basil, tarragon-y kind of flavor in there. Mix it with pecans, especially for like some ultra sweetness to it. Really sort of draws out some of that bitterness and matches it perfectly. Beet greens, of course, saute, turnip greens, stew, braise, broil. I mean, you got it. So how to buy them? We're looking for that firmness. Again, you're looking for cleanliness. Let's see. With vegetables such as a potato or sweet potato, one of the things that I look for, and well, it really kind of depends on the dish that I'm making. So here is a golden sweet potato. Is it golden? I don't even know what this is. I've never seen this thing before. Anyway, so this potato is going to give you a lot of very uniform cuts, right? Because it's relatively the same size and shape all the way through. So if you were to roast this thing, it would cook at a even rate, right? Now, all of the sweet potatoes I have are relatively the same shape and size, but imagine one is just very bulbous over here and thinner over here, like an exaggerated version of this. This is going to give you pieces that are different size than what's over here, and it's going to cook a little differently. So if you're doing a roasted sweet potato, try and find one that's really uniform. If you're doing something where you're just dicing it up and chopping it into root veg, great. Go with whatever the farm grew. You know, I am not one for perfect vegetables. I like me an ugly vegetable for the environmental reasons, but also just I'm not picky about much in my life. So why should I be picky about vegetables? So looking for that universal size and shape is important just to the dish if you're thinking about it, but otherwise buy them any which way you found them. So how to store them? Most people are buying vegetables sort of week of use, I would imagine. Around my place, though, we grow a whole lot of potatoes. I grow a lot of sweet potatoes. I grow a lot of onions. I grow a huge amount of garlic. And I have a breezeway between the barn and the house that stays a relatively cool temperature. So I keep them around 45 to 55 degrees or so in there. And I keep them in the dark with a little bit of, I wrap them in newspaper, and that keeps them pretty well. That's only for long-term storage. If you're just buying them to take home, put them in the crisper vegetable in your refrigerator, crisper drawer in your refrigerator, and you'll be just fine. So there you go. All right, so I'm going to clean off this cutting board just a little bit because I'm kind of driving myself nuts with too much stuff here. It's hard to focus when you have too much stuff. Life complexities, right? It's the measure of just how much stuff we have in our life and what's going on and all that. And I am needlessly complicated at this moment. So let's take a couple of questions, and then I'm going to get to a couple of interesting root vegetables like turmeric and ginger and shallots and garlic and horseradish and some other fun things. But we'll take a couple of questions right now, and then we'll get to that. And I've got a couple of really fun dishes that we're going to get into. So, all right. From Ava. Hi, friend. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. What is the best way to store root vegetables such as potatoes and sweet potatoes to prevent sprouting, especially organic ones that seem to sprout a lot quicker than conventional ones? Okay, well, I've just gone over this for the most part for long-term storage and that cold storage, that sort of root cellaring. If you've got a wine cellar in your house, that's a perfect place to put it because they're basically the exact same thing as a root cellar. If you are buying things on that weekly basis, such as potatoes, sweet potatoes, want to keep them from sprouting, basically what you've done is taken them out of cold storage at the store and in the supply chain and put them at home on your countertop. And that potato says, woo, it's spring, it's 70 degrees in here. That's cool. Hey, buddies, let's go, right? And they start sprouting. Well, honestly, bottom line is those sprouts are fine. Yes, it changes the physiology of the potato a little bit, but I mean, I deal with this literally every day with sprouted garlic, sprouted vegetables, etc. And I just use them. I don't really mind that much. They also don't sit around long enough for those sprouts to really become plants. And you know what? If they do, like, congratulations, you get the Darwin Award. You're going out into the garden. Like, you survived, you survivor. Like, that's me, that's my life. But honestly, I don't think it's much of a deal if you're talking about a week or so, maybe less. But you could just keep them in the refrigerator. That would help, or in any cool area. Cool. Thanks, Ava. I appreciate you. I hope I got your name right there on the pronunciation. All right, from Bill G. What can I store together and what roots should not be stored together? I've not really thought about that, Bill. What an interesting question. I think if you're storing everything really kind of properly, then there's not so much reason to keep things separate. I mean, say your garlic and onions next to your potatoes. Can the potatoes absorb some of that aroma? Yeah, but if your garlic and everything is stored correctly, those aromas really aren't blooming, if you will. And so there's not a whole lot of aroma to go around. But another thing that I might imagine here is that some root vegetables would give off some off gas of ripening agents, like bananas give off a powerful ripening agent called ethylene. I believe it's called ethylene. So back when I worked at the Four Seasons flagship property for our Sunday brunch, we would get our melons in, for the big sliced melon fruit platters. We would get our melons in about a week and a half early to the Sunday brunch, and we would store them with a bunch of bananas in a very small closet, and that would sort of fill up with that ethylene gas and sort of help to ripen those post-harvest to make them super sweet. I know that pineapples as well do that. But with root vegetables, I don't know of that happening with any of them. So I would just assume that all root vegetables can be stored together. And in my experience, I've not had any difficulty. So, and you know what? If my potatoes tasted a little bit like garlic, that's okay, because I put a lot of garlic on my potatoes anyway. Hey, Bill, thanks for your question. That was really fun. Appreciate you. All right, from Elise. Hi, friend. Nice to have you joining us. I find that some root vegetables have a strong, even bitter taste. Rutabagas, turnips, especially. Yep. What spices or method of preparation do you recommend to make them tasty and flavorful? Well, you are absolutely right. Turnips and rutabagas, members of the Brassica family, along with kohlrabi, which grows mostly above ground, but is still actually a root veg, I think, because of the role that it plays in the biology of the plant. Yes, those are spicy, much as brassicas are. Mustard greens are a brassica as well. They have those acids in them and those flavonoids that have that bitterness. So turnips, rutabagas, really roasting, caramelizing in some way, sweetening those natural sugars or bringing them to the fore is really the very best way to do it. If you simply boil them in salted water, yes, it sweetens them to a degree, but I admit, yes, turnips can be a little bit brash. They can be a little bit like an adolescent, teenager, just a little bit attitude-y, right? And not really kind of playing well with others in their family. I haven't gotten there yet. My boys are year and a half and 5.5. So anyway, they're just gems right now, but no turnips in the family. So with those, I like to roast them. And what that does is it draws out some of that moisture, obviously by drawing them out, desiccating them. That concentrates the sweetness, thus bringing it to the fore a little bit more. Also, it caramelizes it a little bit, Maillard reaction, and so it changes the nature of those sugars in the way that we perceive them, giving us that sort of satisfying, rich elegance that we love about roasted anything, whether you're talking about roasted bananas or turnips, it's all the same. Things that add sweetness are, of course, a really great way to go about doing this as well. Maple syrup added as part of a glaze with maybe a little bit of butter. Adding cream to a mashed turnip or rutabaga, of course, is going to sweeten this. Any form of dairy would do that. If you're in the forks over knives and whole food plant-based stuff, there's all sorts of different ways. I mean, pair it with oranges. If you're boiling turnips and orange work really well together. So just a little bit of orange juice in the water, not really to sweeten it so much as to add the perception of sweetness. Even orange zest taken off and simmered in the water with it to aromatize it. I found offers that, like, we know that orange juice is sweet, right? And so the taste memory of it sort of pulls us there. Herbs can go either way as well. They can sometimes add a little bit of bitterness if you're not careful. So basil and turnips, which is kind of, February meets August anyway, I found doesn't really work very well because it does draw out that bitterness. So those are a couple of ways that I would recommend. So spices is another, I just saw in your question again. So sweeter spices, and not saying sweet, but like baking spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, I think have a tendency to draw out, I think somewhat by perception and taste memory, but also just by virtue of how they work. Turmeric would be a really great one as well to help draw that out. And I'm not talking about a much. It doesn't have to be a cinnamon flavored dish, but just a little bit. Even sweet, smoked sweet paprika, adding that smoky flavor on the spice in the background. And the way that I would incorporate these is take your root veg. If you use oil, toss it with oil, maybe some grated garlic, a bunch of salt and some pepper. If you like pepper, I would leave the pepper off until the very end. I don't like to really roast pepper. I like to, if I'm using it, add it fresh on at the very end so you get the most out of it. But roast the veg till they're almost fully done, if not all the way done, and then make a sort of slurry with a little bit of oil and whatever spices you're using, just a pinch of cinnamon, that black pepper, smoked paprika. Make a paste out of that, a slurry, toss the root vegetables in that, put them back in the oven for a minute. just to toast those spices and kind of bloom their flavors, and you find that it radically alters the flavor of what you're eating. So that's actually going to turn me back, because I'm talking about all this, so I had to grab a towel there, to one of the dishes that I'm... Don't take things out of an oven with a wet towel. There's my advice for you today. So I have this really fun steam oven back here. It's a countertop one. So I've been steam roasting this turnip for a little while, and this is the same kind of turnip that I bought, right? Woo! Should stop doing that, shouldn't I? And all I've done is I cut just the very top off, cut the bottom off, the base of that of the stems there for the plant, and then I just made these lines coming down, and I just carved it in like. I keep touching the pan, and you see I've got this beautiful sort of globe, right? And it's really what it looks like. And I left the skin on there, and what I'm going to do is I've got a glaze of maple syrup and mustard, and you know what, I'm going to add some salt to this. And I've been baking this for, it was at 300, 350, and then I turned it down because I didn't want to overcook it while I was talking to you. But what you can smell now, though, is the sweetness of this turnip is coming out incredibly strong. I've used a knife just to poke, a little paring knife, and as soon as it feels, it gives way easily. Excuse me. And the reason that I put those little lines in there is because I was planning on glazing it. And what I'm adding here is whole grain mustard and maple syrup. And I'm just basting that over the top to see what I've got here. All right. And just let's throw that back in the oven just until that maple syrup kind of bubbles a little bit. And that's it. And there's your dish. It's sort of this beautiful, wonderful, root vegetable. Instead of being mixed with other root vegetables and relegated to a side dish, all of a sudden it's this sort of centerpiece. I didn't make it, I'm not trying to make it mimic meat here, but that's going to be a very, very satisfying dish, especially if you put like a wonderful herb pesto or just herb salad around it. I mean, think about leaves of fresh mint picked and lightly bruised by the action of picking, parsley leaves, some dill, which goes really nicely with turnips, some thinly shaved fresh shallot, all tossed together, maybe with some almonds or walnuts, and sort of served as a salad around the side, just a drizzle of lemon juice over top. Oh my God, this is going to be super, super tasty and a really fun dish. You got a fork and knife, there you go. Fun way to cook it. So there you go. That was a long answer, at least, but sort of the heart of what we're talking about today, if you will. So I'm going to let that cook a little bit longer, and then I'm actually going to turn this on and get that nice and hot. We'll take another couple questions here, and then keep going with some of those dishes. All right. Hi, Diane C. Nice to have you join us. Thank you. I'm Bart. It's nice to meet you. Let's see, you disappeared up to the top there. Diane, when not cooking with oil, how do I prevent roasted vegetables from turning gray, especially golden beets? And how do I get the nice crispy crust without using oil? I would say start with a hot pan. I'm hesitating a little bit on this because that's not really my specialty. I cook with oil. I haven't done a lot of cooking without oil, but I would say start with a hot pan and think also about the broiler. So what you're doing there is you're immediately exposing those sugars to very high temperatures, the sugars naturally in the vegetables, to very high temperatures, which is going to caramelize and start that Maillard reaction very quickly. Cooking over very high temperature is going to do the same thing. So I think that would help. And so the pan itself would start to sear those vegetables even as you put them into the oven. Think about a cast iron pan, something like that. Yeah, there you go. I would also pat them dry quite a bit, maybe even salt them ahead of time just a little bit to start that process of leaching out some of that moisture, and then pat them dry. And what that's going to do is it's going to draw some of those more of those sugars to the surface as well, and make that caramelization, make that sear a little bit easier to achieve, so long as you pat them dry, just with a paper towel or something. So there you go. Hey, Diane, thank you for your question. I appreciate you. To Laura, would you consider making one of your live events entirely dedicated to onions? Well, yes, I would, Laura P. Thank you for that suggestion. I'd love to learn more about them, including onion greens and shallots. I hope my fellow students are interested too. Well, yes, Laura, thank you for that suggestion. I certainly will. Onions, alliums are one of my very favorite topics. There is a wonderful book out by a woman named Kate Walsh, who was the editor for a couple of my own books. She and her husband wrote a book called, I think it's called Alliums. It's a really, really beautiful cookbook. Check that out, because she is a wonderful writer, and the photography in that is art. But that is the reference that I will read up on before I do the live event for you, Laura, and everyone else that would care to join. So thanks for that suggestion. And to the rest of you, anyone that would like to suggest another topic for us, please let me know. We're eager and ready to discuss anything. And if it's not me, then any one of the incredible instructors at Ruby will be able to answer your questions. So, all right. One last question, and we'll head on over to the stove. What herbs do go great with root vegetables? Really, basically all of them, other than, I would say, basil. Basil, I just found, tends to draw out that bitterness, but cilantro, especially a cilantro almond pesto with roasted root vegetables, is incredible. Dill brings a very cool spice to it, which sort of allows the roasted root vegetable to be the warm, sensuous, soft, sort of welcoming flavor in a dish. So it's a nice sort of contrast there between those. I love me some mint. I love me some mint. I love me a mint a lot. I put mint in everything. That nice sort of spiciness to the mint goes away when it encounters sweetness, and really just blooms the aromas of root vegetables. Parsley, of course, is amazing. And when you get into the hard herbs, so all of those I've spoken of are the soft herbs, as opposed to thyme, rosemary, savory, if you will, that will, where you don't use the stem, basically, hard herbs that can be added and removed. I love rosemary with roasted root vegetables. I mean, it's just that super sensuous, woodsy, seductive, rustic smell of rosemary is so wonderful with the sweetness of root vegetables. Thyme to me is like the James Dean on his best behavior of herbs. Like, it's just too cool, It's just like every party is better with thyme when thyme shows up. That's what I got to say about that. Winter savory is another one that works really well. Oregano, I have found, might be another herb that doesn't work so well. And I actually think oregano and basil are very similar in the way that I taste and experience them. Not necessarily in flavor, but just in the way that they kind of impact a dish. So I tend to stick away from oregano. Of course, oregano with potatoes was wonderful, but with the sweeter vegetables, I tend not to find that. So, hey, Maria, I appreciate you. I appreciate your question. So I'm going to head on over to the stove now. I think my pan is hot. So another dish that I've got, and I'm doing sort of another entree or sort of composed dish here. I have some celery root. It's also known as celeriac. That's the vegetable that I was showing you at the outset. An incredible aroma. This is a nice way to use up a very large celery root like I have here. Otherwise, this is a whole lot of celery root, right? I mean, the thing was this big. It was about 3 pounds. Yeah, you go bowling with this. Probably wouldn't hit anything, but you could. And so I've sliced those off in big slices, about 3/4 of an inch thick, and then I used a peeler to peel around the outside this way. You can use a knife to chop down, but I find that what you end up with then are these sort of very angular sides to it, which aren't as attractive as just using that peeler to get you your natural edge. I mean, that's, it's just as easy to clean, but it yields a nicer result. And as an aside, another dish that I tend to do that with is when peeling pears. for poaching pears, if you've ever done that. If you use a peeler, you end up with a pear that looks like an MC Escher pear. Like it's got all these like weird angles to it and it's all over the place. So I actually use a little green scrubby, or like the sponge, my dishes sponge, and I just sponge off the skin. And so what you end up left with is this completely like denuded, elegant, sexy pear. I think I've used the word sexy maybe 3 times already. Way too much. Way too much for half an hour into our event. So I'm a butter guy. I'm really an olive oil guy, but it's winter, it's root vegetables, so I'm going to be using a little bit of butter to sear these celery root pieces. And those celery root pieces I simmered in salted water with a little bit of ginger and a lot of bay leaf. Any of you who join me know I love me my bay leaves. So I've simmered them till they are very soft, but not falling apart. And I'm now going to sear them in a little bit of browned butter. And so this is, I'm not trying to turn the celery into meat, but I'm borrowing from, well, just the construction of and sort of composition of a typical American sort of meat diet plate, right? Where you have center of the plate something with a knife and fork. And it's really lovely to do that with the celery root because it acts like that steak, right? Cauliflower steak, celery root steak. So just let those brown a little bit. The flavor of celery root really, really sweetens when you have simmered it, as opposed to turnips, which get a little bit more bitter, I find. But celery root sweetens quite a bit, and then when you sear it, it takes on a nice golden crust, and it's a really lovely, lovely thing to do. So as I am cooking that, let's check on our lovely turnip here. All right. Yeah. Oh my God, this smells good. Holy. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Cursed. So I'm just going to sort of scoop up the remaining maple syrup and the mustard seeds from the outside, and you can tell it's a little reduced and stickier now. But check that out. Isn't that beautiful? It's just, I mean, it's just a cool dish. Was I going to serve this somehow? Yeah. Anyway, I'll just, you could serve it right in this dish, or as I'm going to do, I'm just going to walk off screen for a second, maybe so you can see this a little bit better. But, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. That beautiful thing. Yeah, let's... So let's cut into this now. So the knife just slides through it like butter. It's beautiful, it's moist, it's delicious. That mustard provides a hint of spice. That turnip is now super sweet. Just a little bit of maple syrup. I think I added a half tablespoon or so of maple syrup per this turnip, so really not very much. You could use honey, you could use molasses, whatever. I live in Maine. I have a 200-year-old maple tree in my front yard. I make my own maple syrup. And I thank everything that I live in Maine every time I get to taste it. So, yeah, so there's a roasted turnip with maple whole grain mustard glaze. You know what? I made this up. I mean, not the flavor combination, certainly, but I was like, what dish can I do that I can invent so I can possibly make a fool out of myself when it doesn't work on camera? But yeah, this really worked. So, excuse me. Woo-hoo. It's fun to get things right sometimes. I don't know. Yeah, I also don't get to cook like this too much because, well, I've got a 5-year-old and a 19-month-old, and they're really good eaters and they're pretty adventurous, but they're also not, well, they'd eat that. So I'm just going to add some almonds to this pan, just some regular, roughly chopped up almonds, just enough butter in there to kind of make the whole thing work. And as you can see, they get a nice little bit of color to them. Those almonds I'm just going to let toast. All right, now I'm going to put this whole dish together. Now, I am a huge fan of nuts. I am a huge fan of anchovies. I'm a huge fan of herbs. So I'm going to put all of those almonds right over top. I've got some smoked anchovies that I use. If you look behind me on the shelf, I use a whole lot of canned seafood, especially anchovies. You can get these anywhere. This is the Roland brand smoked anchovies that I particularly like. The dish doesn't need this, certainly, if you're whole food plant-based and not doing the seafood, but I am a huge, huge fan of the anchovies. Just a few pieces of this, and I'm just ripping them apart, really, so they become sort of garnish flavor. Now, if you're looking at me and saying, like, ew, that dude eats anchovies, man, I thought we were friends. Like, what's wrong with him? Can you please just try these anchovies, please? Please. I understand you probably had some really crappy anchovies in your life. Why? Because, well, most people are introduced to them on pizzas, and they're really crappy anchovies to begin with. And I just realized my computer is about to die, so I'm going to plug it in. Excuse me. Give me 1 second here. It's not an event with Bart if something technical doesn't go wrong. All right. Did that work? Did it work? I hope so. Yep. All right, Patrick, or yeah, maybe you could talk to my ear and maybe let me know that it worked. So I'm just going to keep talking, though, just hoping that I'm still in front of you. And then the last thing that I'm going to add to this dish is a soft poached egg. So thank you for that confirmation there. So I'm just peeling a soft poached, I'm just peeling a very soft boiled egg here, and I'm doing it quickly. So, oh, back to the anchovies. I'm sorry. The anchovies part of things. You've probably had some really crappy anchovies in your life. Yeah, and anchovies on pizza, just, you know what? Even for my love of anchovies, I tend to avoid anchovies on pizza because I just don't like the way they taste. But anchovies mixed into a marinade, mixed into... I have completely failed on peeling this egg. Look at this. So I am a professional chef. It's terrible. But it's okay. It's also deeply okay because we all make mistakes, right? So I'm just going to keep doing on this one. Man, we're having a day, aren't we? So, okay, so anchovies, they're really good anchovies, and I'm not talking very expensive, but they add so much flavor, so much charisma, so much of that umami bomb to things, and they really bring entire dishes together. Just a few little pieces there on top of the celery root. Celery root also goes kind of famously well with anchovies. All right. So I'm failing at this egg too. So I'm going to say that it's because I'm not paying enough attention and that the eggs are really hard to peel. So I'm going to finish this dish, though, with my terribly peeled egg. And I'm just going to mash it out. Oh, it's not even that soft-boiled anymore. But letting that yolk sort of run all over, kind of creating a sauce for it for the whole plate. And then a couple of pieces of parsley that I'm just going to very unceremoniously rip. And I kind of like to rip herbs like this. Yes, you can chop them all super fine, but ripping them bruises them slightly and sort of adds to their aroma, if you will. So there's my dish. Seared, brown butter seared celery root with anchovies, toasted walnuts, a soft-boiled egg, and some parsley. And I am really looking forward to eating that. You know what? I mean, that is a restaurant quality, minus the job I did on the peeling of the egg there. Restaurant quality dish, and a nice one. Good nutrition there as well. So a couple of dishes for you there. I got one more dish to show you, but we're going to take a couple more questions here. Try and make sure that we get down to the bottom of this very long list of questions. Oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. So, well, let's just get a start. What is the best, healthiest recipe for plant-based burgers? From Michael. Wow. You know, Michael, I don't have that off the top of my head. I know that there are some in the Ruby archives. Maybe Patrick, my colleague at Ruby, if you could maybe post a link to that up there at the top of the chat, that would be great. But Michael, I make mine out of a mix of brown rice, farro, beets, dates, black beans, and a whole bunch of spices. And I find that's a really nice blend of them. Great nutrition in that, of course, but also good blend of textures and tastes. But because the ratios in there are so important, that I'd urge you to take a look at those recipes. Cheers. Hey, thanks, Michael. Appreciate the question. From Terry. Hey, Terry, nice to see you. I usually have beet juice after simmering them in a little water. Any tips for using it in a dish? Thank you. I've never thought about that. Usually, because when I boil beets, I season the water with salt well enough that it would be saltier than would be useful. I mean, certainly you could just freeze it and use it as sort of build it up and use it as the base for a borscht soup. You've got a natural beet stock there. You could add it to a vegetable stock or whatever. It would obviously color everything it touches quite red. But borscht soup is really wonderful, even without the beef and all the meat additives that are typically in it. But a vegetarian borscht is wonderful. Let's see, what else? You could add a few tablespoons of it to a creamy spread, whether you're using a nut cheese, for a nut cream or something like that. Hey, add it to your smoothies too. You got great nutrition in there, and it's a great flavor. It's nice and sweet, a hint of bitterness to the backside. So there you go. Hope that works. And if you don't have too much of it, you could even reduce it down till it's sort of a thick beet syrup, if you will, and then make a vinaigrette out of that. Just simply some lemon juice, a little bit of salt, maybe some nut oil. Walnut oil with that would be killer. Cherry vinegar or lemon juice would be really wonderful. Don't reduce it down until it burns, obviously, but get it down to sort of a thick, warm molasses-like consistency, and you'll have a punch in the face of beet flavor, which would be really wonderful, then drizzled over your beets or anything else you're eating. There you go. Hey, Terry, appreciate you. Another one for Terry. When roasting root veg, what are the effects of using butter versus extra virgin versus olive versus avocado versus flavored, unflavored canola, blah, blah, blah? Is it all about the oven temperature, or is there more to understand? Certainly there's a nutrition aspect to this and whatever diet you're following. But if you're asking about all of those various ingredients, I'm guessing you're willing to use them. So really it's about flavor more than anything else. The fat is not going to burn in the oven at the temperatures that you're cooking root vegetables at, which is probably, max 425. Butter, I think I would shy away from in this case, simply because the root vegetables are typically served and go to room temperature pretty quickly. So if you're using butter, it has the potential to congeal or at least solidify enough to make its presence known, sort of in the dish or on the palate, as opposed to any of the oils you mentioned, which would really disappear and integrate into the dish if used judiciously. So I would say that's the only thing there is flavor and possibly texture on butter, but then also nutrition. So anything like extra virgin olive oil, yes, I've heard all of the things about it burns at low temperature and you shouldn't saute with it, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what I do? I saute with it and I grill with it and I cook everything with it. And I really don't own neutral oils for any reason other than to make aioli out of them, where I don't want the full flavor of extra virgin olive oil. So I'll use maybe a cup and a half of canola oil or rapeseed oil to a half cup of extra virgin there. And just that's, again, a flavor thing. So I cook everything in olive oil. It's my preferred medium. So there you go, Terry. Hey, appreciate your questions. You're wonderful to have joined these events. I love them. All right, from Deborah, can you share flavor profile ideas to transform sweet root vegetables into more savory, non-sweet dishes? Sure, absolutely, Deborah. Great question. Spices like cumin, coriander, fennel seed, mustard seed, sage, mustard powder. Let's see, what else am I looking at over here? Chili flakes, certainly, black pepper, allspice. Spices like that are ingredients to me that automatically kind of bring us a little bit more towards the savory side, as opposed to cinnamon, nutmeg, which take us more towards the sweeter side. And again, sort of back to a point I was making earlier, maybe that's just sort of our perception and taste memory that's telling us that this is sweet. But those slightly spicy spices, cumin, coriander, especially fennel seed, most people know are my favorite thing, and black pepper are really great ways to add that hint of spice and to draw you into that savory. And then fresh herbs at the end, parsley over the top, just large pieces of parsley crushed with your hands and torn over is a really great way also to freshen that sweetness up and sort of bring it back to life and enliven it in a way. So there you go. Hey, hope that helps. Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate the great question. From Audie. Hi, Audie. Nice to see you again. What's the best way to cook yucca and nami? You know what? Those are not ingredients that I have much experience with, despite the fact I grew up in an El Salvadorian neighborhood, and it was around me much, but really yucca chips, mashed yucca cakes is really the only ways that I've really experienced it and cooked with it myself. So I don't have much more to offer in ways of innovation on that, I'm sorry to say. But really think about any potato dish when it comes to yucca. You have less moisture in yucca than you do in potatoes, so you have to be careful there. But in terms of flavor combinations, whether you're talking about gratins, whether you're talking about salads like a German-style potato salad where you're mixing in the hot-boiled vegetables with vinegar and spices to kind of enliven and bloom those as they get absorbed in, fresh herbs. Go outside of the traditional culinary realms of those ingredients and go with herbs like, I imagine dill and yucca would go really nicely together. Sherry vinegar and yucca would go very nicely together. Yeah, so there you go. But I'm sorry that I don't have really an off the top of my head answer or a deeply experienced answer, but there you go, off the top of my head. Thanks, Audie. Appreciate you. Hey, Judith. Hey, friend, happy birthday. I hope your travels have been safe. It's been nice to be in connection with you. Thanks for joining. What actually constitutes a root vegetable, as many don't grow under the ground? A turnip is a root, yet kohlrabi is a stem, and they grow almost the same. Yep. And also their greens are uniformly edible. I hate to waste anything. I don't know of many root vegetables where the potatoes don't eat potato greens. Nope, don't eat potato greens. That's nightshade. You don't want to do that. Sweet potato greens are delicious, though. Turnip greens, mustard greens, which is kohlrabi greens, all of those. Yes, I think generally root vegetable greens, when they're attached to, attached like they are with a beet, are going to be delicious. Yes, and there's oftentimes sort of three vegetables in one. Say with these beets, you have the beet, the vegetable, you have the beet stalk, which to me is a completely different ingredient than the beet green, often lumped together, sold together like Swiss chard. But even when I cook Swiss chard, which is not a root vegetable, but very similar to beets above the ground, I tend to cook the stalks and the greens separately. I'll mix them together, but I don't try and get a single outcome for two very different vegetables in the same pan. I'll just cook them separately and then mix them because you want a little bit of crunch and texture on the stem, but I don't want that, or on the stalk, but I don't want that necessarily in the green. So one cooks longer than the other at different temperatures, perhaps maybe with some moisture in one. So that's the way I think about that, is sort of splitting those up and thinking of them as two ingredients. And what actually constitutes a root vegetable? Well, very helpfully, I looked up this on Wikipedia, and the paragraph there, the first two paragraphs on Wikipedia are going to give you a far better answer than what I remember of those first two paragraphs. But basically, it is an underground storage vessel for that plant, whether it's for different purposes, like ginger is a rhizome, which sends out new plants through the little nodules. So this is sort of the basis of it. Potatoes are sort of similar in that they are storage vessels from which asexual reproduction happens. So I got to say that in this event. But oftentimes they are sort of the storage vessels so that when the annual plant above the ground dies, the turnip underneath the ground is there to provide the nutrients for a new plant to grow. So it's not a perennial, but rather a self-perpetuating annual in that way. So basically, they're storage vessels underground full of nutrients and deliciousness for both plants and for us. Thank you, root vegetables, for being so delicious. Hey, Judith. Hope that helps. Nice to see you. All right, from Shauna. Hi there. Can you make root vegetables last longer in the fridge? I would say yes. I would add a little bit of moisture to them, probably. Maybe wrap them in a slightly damp towel. Paper towels would probably give you a few more days, if not a week plus. The crisper drawer is a good place. And I would say that maybe one of the more important things here is consistency of temperature. I'm just guessing. This is a guesstimation, but it is the swing in temperatures that causes the biology of these plants, the physiology, to kick into motion, thus to send sprouts up or change starches into sugars, et cetera, and get flabby. So a change in temperature is probably pretty important to avoid. So if you can put them in the back of your fridge where they're not fluctuating every time you open the door, would probably get you a few more days. And that's true of, well, just about anything. So here you go. Some universal advice for you. All right, from Laura. Hey there. What brought you to be so passionate about specializing in seafood and to promote its consumption? Well, thank you. Well, to those of you who just joined because this is a root veg episode, I am a seafood chef and seafood evangelist by trade, training, and birth. I think I just think that seafood is, to me, just the most interesting category of ingredients. It comes from everywhere. It comes from people everywhere. It was really the very first sort of industry in this country, in the United States. Seafood is the first sort of heirloom food for settlers and pilgrims. It was upon the backs of cod that this nation was founded by the white settlers. Certainly there are heirloom foods that go far back beyond us, our presence here. And I don't mean to negate the importance of that, but seafood is just such a rich part of the modern history of this nation. It's delicious, it's interesting, it's storied. It's an industry that spans the globe. And though seafood represents 2% of our global food supply, it represents almost 10% of global livelihoods. That's how important it is and outsized its importance is in terms of the economics and culture of it. I think it's delicious. It's fun to cook. Oh, and it's also very, very healthy for us. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential to healthy aging, but also essential to healthy pregnancies and early developing years. They help us retain. They help improve our mental health. They ward off a number of different lifestyle and diet related illnesses. Seafood alone can't do this. We have to live smartly across the board and eat mostly vegetables, of course, and small, adequate, delicious, enjoyable portions of seafood. But to me, it's a broad category. And, I started off as a seafood chef, and I got really interested in sustainable seafood, which I found it was our responsibility to really fix the problems with seafood. But in the 20 or so years that I've been engaged in that effort, so much progress has been made. Yes, there is very much progress left to be made, but I now see seafood not as our responsibility to fix, but also our opportunity to use seafood to fix people and to build new economies in coastal areas like here in Maine and all over the world, to build healthier public health outcomes in populations, and just to eat deliciously. And it's better for the environment than is any land animal protein. So a lot of reasons for that there, but a small question that I very much appreciate with a very big answer to which I've dedicated my career. So thanks, Laura. I appreciate you. All right, from Joanne, easy peeling techniques for root vegetables, i.e. celery root. Sure. So I use one of these, excuse me, let me jump over here. I use a Y peeler. I like these just a lot better than the stick peelers. I think they have a lot more control. I don't cut myself nearly as often with them, and they, I think, just make the job a little bit easier. So on a celery root, this is a knobby weirdness, right? You're never going to peel that properly. I think part of it is just you admit that is going into your stock pot. And the only reason why I wouldn't really use that is because I wouldn't be able to get all of the dirt out of there without ripping it entirely to shreds. And so that would, where's my knife? There's my knife. That will go into the roasted root vegetable stock pot because I can strain off any sand or grit that comes down to the bottom. And just in cutting that off, I've got grit, sand on my cutting board, thus proving my point. So trim off those very ends, and then, just put your time into it. Yes, it's still going to be knobby, and you can go over it. And those knobs are going to prevent you from really getting all of it. And you know what? Here's the other thing. A little bit of skin left on is okay, so long as it's not dirty. Cut them into smaller, manageable chunks that you can handle easily, that you can sort of maintain your strength throughout the act of peeling. And that's it. And you know what? It's not like a carrot where you go done, right? Yes, it does take a little bit of work. It does take a little bit of effort and maybe some manipulation of the size and the shape just to get down to it. But so there you go. So I recommend it. The other thing is also the skin doesn't necessarily need to come off all the way. Any big knobs where something was cut off and it's now sort of scabbed over, I would definitely remove that. But there you go. Carrots, I don't remove the peels from carrots. You know why? Because there's a lot of nutrition in there, and so long as they're clean, they're delicious. I mean, it's great. I buy organic carrots. I grow my own carrots, and that's that. And just while we're talking about peeling them, here's a really fun way to do it. I don't think you can see the cutting board, but so I'll stand up and do this. When we put carrots in salads, people tend to do these, rounds or half moons or something like that. And you can never get them onto your fork. You can never really integrate them into the salad. They'll always end up at the bottom, right? So make your carrots look like salad greens. Watch this. See what I'm doing? I'm rotating the carrot around, and I would be doing this on a cutting board so I had a solid surface, but I don't think you can see it. So see what I'm doing? Just running that peeler back and forth over the carrot, and I'm going to be able to use about 95% of that carrot this way. And you see what I got? These beautiful, beautiful strands of carrot that now act and eat like a salad green. They integrate in, stay integrated, they hold the dressing well, and I think that they release more of their flavor and are less distracting to the diner when eating them. Because that little half moon of carrot, it's a big crunch in an otherwise soft green salad, right? You want some crunch, but that's a distracting amount. This, you still get it, this crunch, but you get a broader flavor and a better integration. There you go. That was fun. Hey, Vicky. Nice to see you. Do you keep the tops on root vegetables during storage in the refrigerator? It would be better to take them off and store them to you until time to use. I don't know about that, Vicky. I can surmise an answer, which would be to say that the greens are probably going to draw moisture off of your root as they wilt. And those greens are going to wilt a lot faster because greens are not meant to keep, right? And the root is meant to serve the needs of the greens to some extent. So I would say, yes, separate them in the fridge and keep them, and you can keep them together, but separated would probably give you a little bit more time. I don't know anybody that cellars root vegetables with their tops on, if that tells you anything. Mostly because the greens would go bad before the root veg would, and I imagine that they would have some impact on each other. So there you go. Not a scientific answer, anecdotal and guesstimation, but I think probably accurate. There you go. Hey, Vicky, thanks. Appreciate you. All right, I have time for probably 5 or 6, 7 more questions, and we've got about 50 more questions. Wow. Okay, well, you know what? We'll give you some extra time today. Let's go through these. Carrot top pesto with pecan sounds amazing. Would you still add herb or just make it as you would basil pesto? From Marcy J. Good question. I would, it depends on how much carrot tops you have, really. Yes, I tend to add other herbs, which I have a lot of herbs around the house at all times. So I might have that much parsley that I've broken off some of already. So that would go in. Dill and carrot works really well together. Oftentimes bunches of dill are way bigger than the amount needed for like 10 recipes of many dishes. I'm not balking at the generosity, but I often have a lot of dill left over. So yes, add in some other greens. Cilantro works really, really well, adds a nice sweetness to it, and also sort of a nice spice to counterbalance the spiciness of the carrot. So you can do it just straight, or you can add other herbs and experiment. So have fun with it. Cheers. From Marie, hi there. What to cook root vegetables to help temper the rooty, earthy taste? From Sean Marie. Okay. That caramelization is really going to be key. Those spices, I think, are another way, and I've spoken about this. Adding ginger, I think, is a really great way, which is another earthy, rooty thing, but also kind of a very ethereal flavor, if you will, an aroma. And fresh herbs added at the end is a really great way to bring the root veg back to life. As I said a little bit earlier, sort of add that pizzazz, that freshness to it. And that helps to diminish, or as you say, sort of temper that earthiness, that rootiness down. You can also always just add sweet something too, like I did with this the mustard and maple syrup glazed turnip, which I'm really looking forward to eating. Cool. Hey, you know what? I made another recipe that I wanted to share with you, and I'm not going to get to if I don't do it now, but turmeric. Turmeric is an ingredient that I am just learning how to use. It looks a lot like ginger now, doesn't it, right? Turmeric, you're probably used to it as a dried spice, but it's now becoming widely available in the fresh form. Sell them in these giant bags, which is the only way that I could get it. I think I got this at Whole Foods. I have no idea what I'm going to do with that much turmeric. No idea at all. So I went looking for some things, for some recipes, and turmeric is this brilliant orange color to it. I'm just going to peel it down here. Brilliant, brilliant orange color that sort of fades a little bit as it dries into the dried powder. That's used commonly in curry. If you've ever had curry powder, you've had turmeric. But I was looking around the internet, and my friend Cal Petronell, who is an amazing, amazing chef who was over at Chez Panisse for many years. He's got really, really wonderful books. He's got this salsa, this turmeric salsa, which is really, really good. It's turmeric roots, peeled and then shaved super, super thin as you can, mixed with black pepper, chili flake, not chili flake, fresh jalapeno, lime juice, a little bit of olive oil, and salt. And I made this just before we went on air here today. I'm looking forward to using this tonight. It's very spiced. It's very spiced, not spicy necessarily, but it's got a wonderful crunchy texture to it, a really nice broad flavor. And over something like salmon that has that fatty richness to it would be really incredible. The dish that Cal Petronell has is served over toast with goat cheese, which I can imagine just being just stellar. So there you go. There's turmeric and a fun, interesting way to use it. So if you see these little weird, knobby, tuber rhizome, not a tuber, yeah, check them out. It's fun. And if you don't have to buy a whole bag of them like I did, then take a couple home and experiment with them. I mean, I used approximately that many pieces to get about a half cup of salsa here. And that will be more than adequate for a meal for 4 people or so. So cheers. All right, back to questions. Barbara, onions. What onion to choose when cooking them? Would you talk about onions with us? Sure, absolutely. So we're going to do a whole class on onions one of these days. Some onions, though. I love me some alliums, and another dish that I was going to cook for you today was some roasted onions. So I use yellow onions for almost everything that I cook, where the onion gets integrated in. So my sauteing zucchini, making beef stew, a chicken or a seafood pot pie, etc. I'm using yellow onion. And there because I think the sweetness to spiciness to texture and generally just the size of yellow onions is very convenient for a lot of recipes. I use red onions when I'm featuring the onion a little bit more. Like in this case, I was going to make this roasted onion salad. I was going to top it with a mixture of sherry vinegar and olive oil, and then put some, sprinkle some goat cheese over the top of it. So a nice sort of Spanish type dish, if you will. And all I did is I sliced these along the equator and then roasted them at high temperatures. And if you don't burn them, you can still get, you hear the microphone here, it still gets nice and crispy before it gets bitter. That's a nice little touch to it. But red onion, charred red onion in particular, is to me one of the most charming and elegant of all singular flavors that there is. Just to me, there's very few things that are as charismatic as just get a pan rip roaring hot and take some thin sliced red onion, throw them in a dry pan and let them burn just a little bit, let them char, let them singe and sear, and they become this perfect topping just as they are. Nothing else added to them. I love that. I don't tend to cook red onions into dishes. The reason for that is that they end up they lose their vibrancy and end up just being kind of pallid, purple, brown, limp, long things that honestly look like worms. So I don't use them that way. They just end up distracting and less. And I think they also have a lot more sweetness to them that is often hard to manage when they're cooked into things. Yellow onions have the perfect level of sweetness. Shallots I use raw. I will, of course, cook with shallots, especially if I'm doing like a sauteed zucchini right at the very, very end. I'll add the shallots in so that just the residual heat sort of wilts those finely diced shallots. So they're still textured. There's a little bit of crunch, but they really bring all that wonderful allium flavor to the dish. Certainly in salad dressings, I will use shallot. And also in the salads themselves, I will shave it very thinly, lengthwise, top to bottom, very thin little shavings of it that I'll mix with a lot of herbs for a nice little garnish salad. Not chopped herbs, but just torn mint leaves, torn parsley, and maybe some chervil or cilantro is a really wonderful way to go. Sweet onions, yes, they're good, but they have too much sweetness in them for me for most things. We're talking about Maui Maui, Sweet 100s, Vidalias, etc. I will whole roast those. I mean, a whole roasted onion with a mustard glaze like this, like I did with a turnip, would be really wonderful. Roasted sweet onions, just such as this. This is the yellow onion, but a sweet onion roasted, cut 3/4 of an inch thick or so. Olive oil, roast them at high temperature, maybe 400 degrees. Take the skin off before you roast them. Serve that with a spicy blue cheese, something like cabrales or a gorgonzola, like a gorgonzola dolce, where it's got that real bite of the penicillic acid, like in the back of your throat there. Oh man, that would be a very, very good dish. So there's a bit about onions. I want to make sure we get onto some of the other questions. But hey, Barbara, check back. We're going to be doing an onion episode soon. Thanks for the question. All right, from Deborah, what root vegetables are convenient for growing inside a small condo, and what kind of lighting is needed? Interesting. I would say beets, carrots, radishes. Relatively short growing seasons. Radishes only 18 days or so for some of the smaller ones, like these ones, the little cherry bell radishes, or the French breakfast radishes. They grow pretty well in all kinds of soil as well. So the soil that you can get, like potting soil, would probably work nutrient-wise, density-wise for radishes, carrots, and beets. The thing about root vegetables is that often they take quite some time to grow. So sort of the real estate and effort invested for the return would be pretty low if you're dealing with something like a potato or something with a very lengthy growing season, rutabagas, long-growing turnips, etc. Celery root's like 110 days, I believe, as opposed to a beet, which is 45 days, as opposed to a radish, which is 18. Some carrots go up to 75 days, but there's some that are as low as 50 in terms of typical growing season. So there you go. That would be my recommendation on that. Also, because the beets, radishes, and carrots also give you greens that are usable. So you're really maximizing the output. Plus, they're delicious and they're really great and they're really rewarding when they're so young and fresh and tender and picked and put into a pan. They're really, really delicious that way. So that's what I would say. There you go. Hey, fun question. Cheers. From Margot, what was the name of the author of the book of the onions you mentioned previously? What is it? You know, I'm going to look it up because I think I said Kate Walsh, but I believe it's Kate Winslow Williams. Is it Kate Winslow? Yes, Kate Winslow. I am so sorry. She was my editor for 3 books, and I got her name wrong. Kate Winslow, and the book is called Onions. There you go. Sorry. I just Googled that for us. Let me get back to our questions page now. There you go. Kate Winslow, Onions. Brilliant, brilliant book. From Barbara J. Can you please talk about the difference in flavor uses for table salt, kosher salt, and sea salt? So confusing. Yes, Barbara, it is confusing, only because we've made it confusing, because in the end, there's actually no difference. Excuse me. Here's the thing. All salt seasons food. Salt has different amounts of sodium in it per volume of salt, just in the way that the crystals form, which really presents the biggest difference to me. Yes, there are different chemicals and compounds that are also in the salt, which can change flavors. I mean, think about iodized salt versus sea salt. But when you put that into a stew or sauteed this or that, honestly, the difference becomes so negligible in terms of flavor that if you can taste the flavor differences at all, they're lost in the dish. So here's my advice. Use a salt that you know how to use. Salt seasoning something is a physical memory. I'm going to reach into my salt pot here, and I'm going to season this piece of whatever food in front of me, and I know exactly how much salt I just added to it. Why? Because I have been using this box of kosher salt, the Diamond Crystal Red Box Kosher Salt. I have been using this since 1996 when I first started cooking. Okay, this is the only salt in every single kitchen that I've ever worked in. I know how to use this salt. Why? Because it's a physical memory. I can do it from over here. I just know. That's what's more important than the type of salt. If you use iodized and that's what you like, go ahead and use it. When I use iodized salt, I screw up everything I put it on. Why? Because this salt has so much greater volume per salinity than does kosher salt, which is tiny little crystals, as opposed to this, which are big flakes. Morton kosher salt is even bigger flakes, the Morton brand. So I don't use that because also I don't know how to use that salt very well. And sea salt, I stick with this because it works for me. It's relatively inexpensive, and there you go. Sea salt is more expensive, and I would have to learn how to use it. So whatever salt you want to use, there you go. Use that one and learn how to use it. There you go. I hope that helps and reduces some of the confusion. Salting is a skill. It's not an ingredient to me, if that makes sense. It's the practice of it that makes it worth using, not just its existence. There you go. Hey, fun question. Hey, Win, if I want to grill vegetables, what do I substitute for oil? Plant Plus class says to use oil, and I've not been using oil for 2 years. Thank you. Get your grill hot is the answer for that. You don't need to use oil. If your grill is hot enough, it will create the separation that you're looking for the oil or the lubricant to provide, right? If your grill is not to temperature, just like if your pan that you're trying to sear your mushrooms in is not very hot, what are you going to do? Well, you add your mushrooms in and you start steaming them instantly, right? Because you're not searing, you're just releasing juice by heating and basically steaming the mushrooms. Same thing is true on your grill. If you don't want to use the oil, then just make sure that grill is hot enough. And as soon as you put that down, that heat will create that separation. It will also create all that caramelization and crusting that you want from it. And if you have denser, larger pieces of vegetables, as opposed, like say a half of a zucchini sliced lengthwise, as opposed to a very thin slice of zucchini, that half zucchini is going to take longer to cook. So you want to start it on high heat and then possibly move it over to a lower heat area of your grill to continue cooking. And by that time, it won't be sticking and you will be all set. There you go. Excuse me. I'm beginning to lose my voice again. Hi, Lewis. How are you, buddy? What are some good books to read and review to improve my skills that any home cook has in cooking with root vegetables? Sure. You know what? Not top of mind. I can't name one right now. Geez, man. I would just say the Forks Over Knives. The website has an incredible amount of resources available to you. And the class in the Ruby archive as well has a number of great recipes there. In terms of sites, I would visit Food 52. They do such a wonderful job of food, but also really of explaining and of really discussing the ingredient and the technique. They do a really wonderful job of that. America's Test Kitchen as well. I think America's Test Kitchen even has a vegetable cookbook out, so it's not just the magazine, but definitely check them out. Everything that they've ever done is fantastic and very educational. So there you go. All right, a couple more questions, and then I've got to run, unfortunately. Get ready for picking up the boys from daycare here. From Iduna, hi, Chef. I was wondering what your experience is with Irish sea moss. How do I use it? Is it a good binding or thickening agent? Interesting. So yes, Irish sea moss, otherwise known as sea lettuce, Uva lactuca, I believe is its Latin name, is typically used as a source of carrageenan, which is a thickening agent. There is the only dish that I know of that uses it is a dish called blancmange, which is a traditional Irish thickened cream dessert, where the cream is sweetened and then thickened by simmering it with the Irish moss to draw out that carrageenan, and then chilled and set into a dessert, much like panna cotta would be. Sort of like a vegetarian creme brulee as well. Not vegan, certainly, but you could do this with a nut milk as well to make it vegan. Otherwise, I tend to just incorporate it when fresh, because I can get it just off the docks down here and off the rocks just by my house. I will saute it into vegetables, adding it in just at the very, very end. You can add it into salads because it has this very sort of leafy, flowy nature to it. It actually integrates pretty well into salads like leafy greens. So I would try that. It is a great thickening agent. And so there you go. When dry, I know that it can get really, really potent in flavor, though. So just be careful of how much you use there. Cheers. All right, from Marcy. Hey, bub. Again. I love your live events and I love root veg. I'm trying to reduce oils, butter in my diet and stick to more whole food fats. However, I find it challenging to get a nice, evenly roasted veg without any oil suggestions. Sure. So going back to sort of answer this question a little bit earlier, get a cast iron pot, something that's going to hold its heat really well. I just realized that oven was on the whole time, wasting electricity, and that's not good for the earth. Get the pan really smoking hot, and then add your vegetables in. So that's going to get that instant sear to it right off the bat, and then throw the whole pan into a hot oven. And that way you're going to get that really dark caramelized outside, maybe even some charring and burning. So don't go too far into that realm. But a little bit of that is very good, the bitterness to offset the sweetness of the root veg. And then also, as I mentioned, at the very end, make a little slurry of some spices, cumin, coriander, fennel seed, ground fennel seed, or just mashed fennel seeds, maybe a little mace or nutmeg, and mix that with just enough water, or even something like apple juice or another kind of juice, just to kind of make a slurry of it. Take the vegetables out, toss the pan with that so that they evenly coat. Get the spices evenly distributed, throw it back in the oven for like 2 minutes to get that water off and to bloom those spices. And there you go. Hope that helps, Marcy. Wish you well. All right, from Jay. I learned through study that antioxidants are not evenly distributed across the diameter of vegetable or fruit. For example, a red onion, disproportionate amount of the antioxidant is on the first outer layer. Okay, yep, I would say that's right. Sort of the more active layers are where a lot of the just physiological processes are happening, especially with onions. Also in the peels, we know that most of their nutrition in apples, carrots, etc., rely in those peels. Or just there under in the skin in those first layers. So that's one of the reasons why I keep peels on in most root vegetables that I'm cooking. And also you asked my thoughts on prepping portobello mushrooms. Sure. I actually haven't cooked a portobello mushroom in a long time because I came up in professional kitchens when vegetarian cuisine meant the portobello mushroom on the grill served over mashed potatoes with a side of broccoli. And that was it. That was the vegetarian plate. I just got so tired of that, as I imagine most vegetarians did. But you know what? They're really, really delicious. And I love that dish in actuality. Just a marinade of garlic, olive oil, thyme, salt, pepper. Put that on for a couple of hours. It draws out some of that moisture, which you want to sort of wick away from the portobello. So then you grill it, saute it, broil it, etc. You can get a little bit of charred crust and sear to it, get some coloration. So I would suggest that. And I like to keep them whole because when I saute them, when I slice them up, the gills, the bottom side of it, the dark part, I it gets distractingly sort of murky. Yeah, like when you eat them whole, it all stays together. But when I saute them, I found that sort of that juice kind of runs off and just kind of creates this really dark, oozy that I just don't love. There's nothing wrong with it, certainly. I mean, it tastes good and it's fine. I like to serve them whole. It's kind of fun to do the knife and fork thing on them. So, but woody herbs, savory, thyme, rosemary work just egregiously well with portobello mushrooms. Fresh herb salads over top to end them, as I was saying earlier, like parsley, mint, and mushrooms go really well together. So parsley and mint mixed together with some very thinly shaved red onion or shallot, served as a salad over top would be really wonderful. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate you. All right, everybody, I got time for 2 or 3 more, and then I've got to run. Chef from Mark A. Always enjoy your live events. Thank you. I appreciate that. Was wondering if you have any favorite spicy fermentation recipes you could share and any advice on fermentation timeframes. Wow. You know what? I am not an expert on fermentation. I'm sorry to say. It is something that I am learning quite a bit about right now. But given that it is a technique with some potentially real downsides, I won't offer any technique or advice right now until I am more confident in my own preparations that I'm not going to make myself or my family sick. But certainly check out The Art of Fermentation, I believe it's called, by Sandor Katz, Sandor, capital Katz. Sandor Katz wrote basically the textbook on fermentation, and I trust his book on everything. He is amazing, and his ideas are really fun as well. He's got a good culinary sense to him, not just a geeky science side. So it all comes together in a really, really great package. So Sandor Katz, there you go. He's also a pretty interesting philosopher as well, sort of opining on what he learns about fermentation, about the universe, our place in it, and how we interrelate. So there's that added benefit too. There you go. All right, from Lilia. Hi. What vegetables are trending to become staple items in health-conscious and convenience-focused households in 2022? Okay, interesting. Turmeric, certainly. That seems to be all over Instagram these days. I try not to be all over Instagram, but it is a necessary evil, I guess, of my life. So turmeric, certainly one of them. Ginger. Root vegetables that have long been used in cultures and cuisines all over the world, and in Ayurvedic cuisine specifically, for reducing all sorts of inflammation, as well as stress, anxiety, calming the nerves, etc. So on to your second question there, the sort of COVID stress and anxiety. A diet that has those included in it, ginger and turmeric, is certainly maybe get you on that course. But I think really overall, the things that we need to reduce stress and COVID stress and anxiety in our lives is maybe just taking a moment over that cutting board whenever you're preparing whatever health conscious thing you are, to just be grateful for that food that's in front of you and for your ability to feed others, to love them, to perform that act of kindness that is feeding other people. So maybe that's our best antidote to the stresses of this world is, well, to really live in it and to be present in it and to be grateful for all that we have in it and here, those we have here with us. So with that, I'm going to say sorry that I can't get to the rest of the questions. I so very much appreciate each and every one of you. Cooking is an act of love. It is an act of kindness. And that you would care to show up here today with me is an act of kindness and love, and I appreciate that. Right back at you. We'll see you here next time. We'll be in touch.